I'm so excited to be able to finally share the full picture of this Rujuu sweater / cardigan. That was the 2026 version of my Mystery Yokealong. If you were following the Mystery Yokealong, then you'll already know a lot about it. But if this is the first time you're hearing about it, then let me lay it all out. It started in early January where in 7 weekly clues, I released a little bit of the pattern every week on a Friday. For some people it was Thursday because they lived in the right time zones. And nobody knew what the sweater will look like before casting on. Everybody just knew what kind of yarns you could use, and they were ready to jump into this adventure without any idea of what the final product will look like. But now the full pattern is out, all 7 clues have been released, and it's time for me to tell you more about it. I'm Zanete, I'm the designer behind Zanete Knits, and I have released over 100 patterns on Ravelry. And over the last 6 and 7 years, I've tried to perfect the top-down seamless construction so that it results not only in a good look, but also in a great fit. In this video, I'll cover the inspiration behind this design, the yarn, needles, gauge, all of those things, go into quite a lot of detail in the construction and the techniques used, and finish up with some potential modifications. However, I cannot cover all the things that people in the Mystery Yokealong came up with. You're just gonna have to go and check out the school community to get some ideas for that, because they were truly a lot of really nice and surprising, but all really positive and amazing modifications. So, and at the very end of the video, you'll also see all the tutorials that accompany the Mystery Yokealong, where I go into close-up detail, showing technique by technique, step by step, guiding you through all the clues. And yeah, including Steeking. There were over 450 people who joined it during the Mystery Yokealong on school platform alone. I know there were other sub-knit-alongs organized by other people that might not have been on school, and there was also a forum thread on Ravelry. I was not able to take part in all of them because I was really just taken by how many of you joined the school platform, and that kept me busy. I loved engaging with everybody and seeing the work in progress photos and making collages of them every week. It was such a great reward. So I know that there are over 450 people on school, but that's just on school. I'm sure there are many more who didn't feel like they could join the school platform just yet. And I heard so much positive feedback on this Mystery Yokealong. For a lot of people it was their first steek, and they really appreciated the support and encouragement of others. A lot of people praised the fact that we can use our stash yarns, because this design is designed with stash and leftover yarns in mind, which was my 2026 New Year's resolution, which is why the sweater is fully embracing that, because it was like the first design just after I decided that will be my mission. So yeah, that was a great hit as well. And the fact that you can make a cardigan and a pullover, so both options are in the pattern. All of those were seen as great aspects of this project. So the inspiration, right? I just mentioned that my mission was to use up leftover yarns, and I had already committed to so many things around that time when I started working on this. I didn't even think that I will be able to put it up this year, because it does take quite a little bit more time to prepare all the things than a typical pattern. But then just in the last minute, I thought I can probably go with a slightly larger gauge, and which goes very well with my mission to use up my leftovers, and that means I can be quite flexible with mixing various weights together. So I decided that if it's a worsted weight project, I will be able to finish on time and film all the materials. So that was it. So this year it's not a partnership with anybody, it's just my stash busting outcomes come to you and inspire you to look at your stash in a different way, refreshed way. The patterning is inspired by a motif I saw on a Latvian mitten, and it's quite clever. I don't know if people who were knitting it discovered it. I know some test knitters did. That it's the same motif, but it's when I repeat it. Oops! When I repeat these inverted sections, it's as if I cut it in half and put the top at the bottom and the bottom at the top. I hope you know what I mean. It doesn't matter. It's the same motif throughout. And then I thought to make it more interesting, I needed to add in some slipped stitches and some textured stitches. And it just so happens that last year in about 3 different designs, I used this slip stitch technique in a single color garments, or 2 or 3, I don't remember, but basically it was one of my favorite discoveries of stitch patterns last year, so it had to go in this one as well. And then the year before, last year, I also had released my first mosaic pattern, and to kind of celebrate that, I also included some mosaic derived techniques here in the form of these bricks, as the participants call them. And yeah, they called these little cars because it looked like, for some people more than others, it looked like little traffic jams. So yeah, we call them cars and bricks. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of interesting mix of techniques that I wanted to put in this, and that ended up being an all-over Colourwork sweater. Unintentionally, I didn't set out to make it that way, but because I was designing it for leftover and stash yarn, it's quite hard to make long sections in one yarn, because not everybody might have enough of that one yarn. So the plain sections were out of the picture. I couldn't have any. It had to really be motif by motif, by segment, so that you could use a variety of different leftovers on it. And that probably covers the inspiration and what was the reasoning behind all of this. We can move on to the yarn question, and because it is written for 4 different color categories, I'm not using the same color, the darker sort of reddish purple. It changes throughout the cardigan, and they all belong to this category C. So I invented a categorization system for the colors, so anyone without knowing what the design will look like, were able to put colors together. I had quantities, well, I still have quantities for the yarns that you need in each category, but they don't have to be the same colors. They just have to be sort of in the same intensity level. And I actually do have a special video just for the color selection and yarn selection that you should go and check out. It's linked to from within the pattern, and also it's the first video on the school platform where this all happened, is how to prepare and what gauge. So the gauge is 20 stitches times 28 rows in Colourwork stockinette in the round, in 10 by 10 centimeters, 4 by 4 inches. And you can use a single strand of worsted weight, a single strand of heavy DK. You can hold 2 fingering weights together, 2 socks together. I used here at the top, you can see some of the Spin Cycle Dream State in single strand as my darker color, and 2 strands of fingering weight as the gray color. And then later, when I ran out of the Dream State, I used a totally different colorway of dyed in the wool held with a strand of fingering weight that was left over from another project. So I really just had a bunch of similarly shaded leftovers of all kinds. I even have places where I use 5 strands of lace to make the thickness that I need, and marling 2 quite different shades of this rusty color to mimic what I had here at the start, because I ran out. So yeah, it no matter what kind of yarns you use, as long as you stick to the tones and intensities, it'll all work out and look coherent in the end. If you don't believe me, you should check out the projects, at least on Ravelry, for underneath this sweater details page on for some reassurance that it will work. I had to use a size 4mm needles, that's US size 6, throughout the main fabric of this, and then for the neckband, button bands, and also for cuffs maybe. I don't remember if I changed the needle size now, but for the button band and the neckband, I used a 3.5mm, that's US size 4, to make it a bit sturdier and more durable. And in terms of other things that you might need, is if you choose to make this cardigan option, then you'll obviously also need some buttons if you want to close it. And if you're doing the crochet steeking method that I will teach in the tutorials, then you'll also need some sticky waste yarn and a crochet hook. The pattern is written in 9 sizes. I made size 2, and the recommended ease is about 15 to 20 centimeters. That's 6 to 8 inches around the around the chest. So it's quite comfortable. But given the thickness, I wouldn't recommend going on a lower ease, because it will very likely be something that you wear outside, depending on where you live, of course. It's quite a warm garment due to the weight of the yarn and the fact that it's mostly color work and other textures that are quite yarn consuming. So there's a lot of material on you. You don't want it to be too body hugging. So the smallest size finished circumference is 90 centimeters, that's 36 inches, and the largest one is 172 centimeters, or 68 3/4 inches. That was for the pullover. So for the cardigan, it's slightly larger. We just need to add the button band width to get the cardigan measurements. To choose your size that will best work for you, you can take a sweater that fits well, measure the chest circumference there, and find the most closest one in the schematic table. Or you can also, of course, measure yourself and add the recommended ease and find it in the finished measurement table that way. If your full bust area is significantly larger than your upper bust, which is here just under the armpits, that is, you could be a D cup or larger, then I recommend you pick the upper bust measurement and add these to that. Otherwise your shoulders might be too big and might not look too flattering. Now a little more about the construction. It is a top down and seamless round yoke sweater. And let's take a look closer up how that all fits together. I'll move through this quite quickly, just giving a mention and a general overview of how this is worked and how the pieces fit together, because there is a very detailed step-by-step tutorial added to this video that will go in a lot more detail. But just quickly, we'll start here at the base of the neckline, not the neckband, and work the first color work chart. Some sizes will have more color work, some sizes will have less. This is size 2, so there's only a couple of motifs. For sizes, for larger sizes there'll be more, because we simply need to increase more slowly across the top for the larger sizes. So Once we've done the first color work, there'll be some increases there, of course. We'll also add short row shaping in the color B. And as you'll see, some very creative people in the Mystery Yokealong added some patterning here, as well, as they didn't quite appreciate how plain this looks in comparison to what they had just done before. But for simplicity, you can leave it as is, because we'll repeat a color B throughout the sweater and it will look okay. And that was the chart 1. And then we introduced chart 2, which is more color work here with some more increases. And that will be the same for all the sizes, except the larger the size, the more times you'll repeat that chart. And we also see our first slip stitch mosaic derived section here around the yoke. And then we bring in chart 3, which is pretty much the same as chart 1, but it starts from the middle to the top and then from the bottom to the middle, and the colors are inverted. So right now the actual patterning is done with the color A, and the color C is again in the background. And this chart also introduces the sleeve split, so we will have enough, we will have done all the yoke increases in the chart 3. You can do the sleeve split earlier or later than the pattern calls for, if that fits you better, as long as you have done all the increases. If your row gauge is so off that you definitely need to split before you have done all the increases, you can try and increase all of the stitches in earlier rows, because it will be quite easy to fill in the missing bits from the chart, because it is a mirror image from the central line. So you'll be able to intuitively color in what you're supposed to knit when you do the increases, if you have to do them earlier. And also, if you need to do more rows, even if you've finished all of chart 3, you can continue knitting in the round on the yoke, even in the chart 4, and do the separation somewhere here or even later. At the separation, the body will continue on the body, put the sleeve stitches on hold, cast on here at the underarm, and continue working in the round. There will be a fake seam here on the side, which is especially useful for those choosing to do the shaped waist option, because that's where we'll have the decreases running along there. And in chart 4, you also see a new slip stitch pattern and a tuck stitch pattern, which will be fun to do. But both of these stitch patterns have slightly smaller row gauges, which we need to consider when doing decreases. So we'll have to skip some of these rows from counting towards when to place the next decrease, but that's all explained and described also in the pattern in more detail. You can also, of course, go straight without the waist shaping option, but you will have partial repeats at the sides separated by this fake seam anyways. And then once we finish chart 4, chart 5 is basically the same as chart 3, except there's no increases. We already have the full motif. And then as long as you want to make it, you just repeat chart 4 and 5, 4 and 5. So I have, in my sample, repeated chart 4 once more, and then I've gone and done the rib, 5 centimeters or 2 inches of 2x2 rib, and bound off using just a classic normal bind off. Then we move on to the sleeves, and sleeves are also worked in the round. We pick up stitches here at the underarm, and then we have the same purl seam, fake seam, that's a purl stitch, and we do kind of need to do decreases here, as we need to decrease the overall circumference for the sleeve to fit your wrist. So that will mean that the chart starting stitch here for the chart will be ever changing. After every decrease, you'll have to move it one stitch it will be 1 stitch greater as we have smaller and smaller area to cover with the chart. So it can be a little tricky here near the sleeve to set that up. A few knitters said that they really struggled there because they were making assumptions on how it should be. But if you do it step by step exactly as is written in the pattern, within a few rounds you'll find your groove, and then it will just be a matter of enjoying the color work and these textured stitches until you get to the cuff. Which is done exactly the same as the hem. If you like a more gathered, cinched appearance, you can decrease the needle size even more. Mine is laying quite flat, as I think I have quite a thick yarn here used for the hem and cuffs. And then we all get to do the neckband. That was already described in clue 3 actually, but you can wait all the way to the end, especially if you don't know which color to choose yet for that. So it is picking up the stitches along the neckline here. We exclude the steek stitches and we work it either in the round for the pullover or flat for the cardigan, and then we work it to double height, fold it inwards and bind off using 3 needle bind off by picking up the stitches that we joining a live stitch with a picked up stitch from the base of the neckband. That is one option. Of course, you can go completely creative on the neckline and do whatever suits you. And finally, we add the button bands and do the steeking for those who chose the cardigan option. The button bands we do first before we secure and cut the steek. If you're using superwash wool, you'll also be adding a ribbon to stop it from being exposed to the elements and potentially unraveling. But if you're using woolly wools, that will not be necessary. Here is a 1-row buttonhole for the bigger buttons. If you're using smaller buttons, maybe you can get away with just a yarn over buttonhole. But as I said, all of this is described in great detail in close-up videos as I was working on this cardigan. So yes, refer to that section of the video if you need more detail. Right, the modifications and customizations. As I already mentioned, top down, that automatically means you can adjust the length of the sleeves, the length of the body, the length of the yoke, because not everybody could hit the same row gauge, especially because the yarns are all over the place. So you could knit the yoke longer or shorter. The only rule was that you had executed all the increases that are in the chart, and from that point on you can divide for sleeves anywhere to make it comfortable for you. There is already a baked in waist shaping option. You can decrease for the waist and then correspondingly increase if you need to. So that's all incorporated in the pattern as well. Of course, you can stick with a straight fit option, and that's much simpler. The most variety that I saw in the knit along was how people interpreted the neckband. So this is a double folded neckband that's knit in 2x2 rib. I thought I had seen it all, but no, there were people adding really high collared, structured mosaic, kind of repeating this brick pattern to make a really architectural neck. There were tiny little garter edges. There were smaller mosaic motifs. There were colorwork motifs. And yeah, I think it's completely impossible to describe all the creativity that came out of the Mystery Yokealong participants. Because I specifically encouraged them to, feeding off of the previous year's Mystery Yokealong, where people were going quite wild with the neckbands. This year surpassed that by 1,000 miles. So yeah, I was really inspiring to see. And another area where people were customizing a lot is not everybody was happy to invest their time into doing an all-over colorwork motif, colorwork sweater. So a lot of people were rearranging these motifs, especially on the sleeves, because it's a little harder, I guess, to do color work on a smaller circumference. So I saw all sorts of interpretations on how people were utilizing their creativity to do more sections in just one color, plain color. A lot of people also chose to mimic what's happening here at the top near the bottom to provide even more symmetry to the sweater. But yeah, the length is adjustable, and some people didn't necessarily enjoy all the slip stitch techniques, and those could be omitted and replaced by another color work motif. So yes, I can never even describe all the possibilities that are possible with this sweater. So you just have to, it's a recipe, and you can interpret it the way you want and swap out some ingredients and add some other ones in there, and I will still be very, very happy to see what you make in the end. Yeah, there it is. What started as 7 weekly clues and nobody had any idea of what it's going to look like has now been released in its entirety with a whole bunch of already completed projects for you to get inspired by. And honestly, there are so many that I would wear at any point myself that I love a lot more than my own color choices. And I thought my color choices are great. There are some magical combinations that you can see on Ravelry and School. And most importantly, we will have the fashion show, the virtual fashion show, where everybody who participates, no matter how far they've gotten, whether you just started the first clue or you've already finished 2 versions, mind you, many participants were doing 2 versions at the same time, because initially the clues weren't so huge. It was possible to keep up with 2 versions, and a lot of them have finished both versions. So yeah, that's not, I don't know what they're gonna do in the fashion show. They might have to bring a model along with them as well. So yeah, anybody who's participating, welcome to join the Zoom call. We'll stream it on YouTube as well, so anyone who's interested can watch along, and we'll do some showing off of the finished projects. I'm looking forward to that. It's on the 19th of April, 8 p.m. UK time. There is a event already scheduled on my YouTube channel, as well as in the calendar on School platform, so you can kind of make a note and save it in your calendar for that if you'd like to join the Zoom or just watch it on YouTube at the same time. But yeah, and if you have not ever heard about this yet, the full pattern is available with all the videos still in School, as well as at the end of this video. You can download it from the links in the description of this video. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss next year's Mystery Yokealong. Because I asked the question on School whether people would do it again next year, and there wasn't a single person who said, no, it's not for me. That just goes to say how much fun we all had. I hope this video was useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Right, so in terms of the kind of yarns you can use and the weights we can use in this project is whatever works for the gauge, and things that I have used is a wide variety. So I am using a single strand worsted weight here. This is from ages ago. I don't know where I got it, but I had just one skein. It was perfect. I'm also using a Spin Cycle Dream State, also a single strand of that. Then the most easiest one is to combine 2 fingering weight yarns together, or sock weight yarns held double. They can be these are actually two different yarns, but very, very similar shades. So I'm holding these double, or you can hold dyed in the wool is actually working almost like fingering weight yarn in this instance, and I can hold it together with another sock weight yarn or another fingering weight yarn, and that will also get me the gauge that I need. Then you can work fingering weight yarn with something fluffy like mohair, or like in this case I'm using brushed Suri alpaca, I think, from a leftover yarn from a project, with this Cascade Heritage yarn from another project that's left over, and I'm holding that together, and it gets me the right gauge. Also, sport weight and lace weight is a great combination that also works for this gauge. And also I'm using lace weight double in this case to hold with a strand of single ply fingering, and I can also get the gauge with this combination. So as you can see, I've got lace weight, I've got fluffy yarn, I've got sport weight and fingering weight and sock weight, and also worsted weight. I think if you had DK weight and you added a very fine lace thread to it, it would also work, but I just don't have that combination here. That's not to say. And DK weight alone might even work in some places where it's more garter-like fabric, so that will ensure that it stays within the gauge, because garter is wider and sort of shorter than the rest of stockinette. So if you have DK weight yarn and you want to use it for this project, then there will be opportunities to use that. But yeah, I hope this demonstrates the endless possibilities that we have. I'm ready to cast on the Mystery Sweater, and we start with the color from the category C. In my color combinations, the colors in category A are very light and colors in category C are dark, which is why I've got a dark color. If you've got it the other way around, then you would start with a light color. And we have to choose a sturdy cast on, but one that will let us pick up stitches along it later for the neckline finish. And I will be using a long tail cast on. It's my preference. It's by no means the cast on that you should use. You could use a provisional cast on and then unpick it to work the neckline finish from that. However, I have found that it results in quite a stretchy neckline, which then will stretch out your neck as you wear the sweater. And so I would opt for something more sturdy, whichever is your preferred. But for those of you who do the long tail cast on, this is how I would start it. I do a little bit of magic to estimate the tail for your stitch count and hope that it will work out. I think there are some scientific methods on how to do that. Mine is based on purely experience. And so I make sure that the tail is over my thumb, and I do it over 2 needles. That's how I was taught. I think it's much easier to then work the next row around, but you can also do it on 1 needle, of course. And I'm using a 30-inch or 75-centimeter cable. That's also whatever you prefer. Of course, initially the yoke will not be that with that circumference, but we will be adding stitches to increase it, and very soon I will be changing to my largest cable that I have and working with magic glue. But again, this is your personal preference, however you choose the cable size that works for you. This is also where you need to choose how many stitches to cast on, and that will be dependent on your whether you choose the pullover or the cardigan option. In that cardigan, we'll have 7 more stitches that will be added for the steek part. So let's go. I am casting on my 100 or something stitches, whatever pattern says for your size. And this is how it looks. While I've done all of them, I'll come back and show you how we add the steek stitches and join in the round. So here I have 104 stitches for my size. That's the pullover option, but as I'm doing cardigan option, I need to put a stitch marker and to mark the starting of the steek. This stitch marker is not going to fit on my needles for now. So if you have a stitch marker of this type, you can probably easily put it on. If you're doing it on one needle, then you have no problem at all. But I was hoping to reserve this for my beginning of round marker, but here for now, for the time being, I'll just put it on here to mark. So I have to do 7 more stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and oh my goodness, can you believe my luck? It's really there. I could do a few more stitches, but that's it. So yeah, that comes with a lot of experience. I was quite nervous how much of a tail I will leave for this demo, because I am filming and showing it to the public. But yeah, I'm very proud of this estimate. Okay, that's a sidebar. So now I'm ready to join in the round. And before I do that, I need to get rid of one of the needles, and I'll just pull on the cable. I'll be careful not to pull the needle on which I put the stitch marker on, because then it will just fall off. There we go. And next we need to make sure that nothing is twisted. And I like to make a loop in the middle somewhere. I mean, if you're using a smaller cable, you might not have anything like that to worry about, but those of us with magic loop. And then we can put these both needles side by side and check that the purl bumps are on the inside touching and nothing is twisted, and that's where I will be placing my beginning of round marker. And the pattern then says to work 1 round. Just knit across all stitches to beginning of round marker. Right, I will get confused because my steek marker is more prominent than my current beginning of round marker, so I'll probably change that in a second so I never get confused. That's just a habit of mine. But yeah, here we go. This is what it should look like after you've cast on and double triple check that nothing is twisted, because that is not easy to fix. So I'll do my round, and next we'll be introducing the color work, and I'll get back to you when I get there. Right, I've finished my first round and I'm ready to join the color A, which means it's a very high contrast. There should be high contrast between these two colors. And the first, and we start following the chart. So the chart will use 4 existing stitches per repeat and add 1 in the first round. In the first round, we will repeat the chart however many times across 4 existing stitches, and we'll also make an increase. In fact, the increase is the first thing that we have to do, and it's a make 1 in this case. If you've knit from my patterns before, then usually I prefer the lifted increases, but in this case, because the pattern repeat is so tiny and every stitch participates in making of the drawing, then I can't really afford to have any kind of distortions going on. And unfortunately, with the lifted increase, it does pull up the stitch from row below, and it kind of elongates it. So it can cause some unexpected and unwanted side effects. So in this case, we'll just do a make 1 using backward loop. So we make a backward loop, put it on the needle and pull it tight. So there's a new stitch in the category C color. And then we work 1 more stitch in category C, and that's where we add the category A color to work 2 stitches. I usually like to do a little slip knot just to secure this new yarn. I will get rid of it in the next round. This is not a real stitch. I won't be knitting from it and adding an extra stitch, but it just keeps this yarn in place, and I don't have any loose stitches when I work, and it doesn't sort of move around as you would expect when joining a new yarn. The stitch could get longer and longer as the tail gives in. So in this case, it looks like I've got 3 stitches, but I will know when I come to this knot, I just have to slip it off the needle. That was there temporarily to help me secure the new yarn. And then we have to change color again and work one last stitch of the pattern repeat in the category C color. And in this chart, you'll notice that I'm specifically stating that in this clue, we treat the category C as the main, as the dominant, sorry, we treat category A as the dominant. So that means category C is going from across the top. So we pick it up across the top. I will knit 1, and I start a new pattern repeat by making a stitch, knit 1 more in C, and then I will pick up A from the bottom. So for those who might be confused right now, I could pick it up over the top, but that would then make it more recede in the background. So I have to make sure I pick up the dominant color from the bottom. I work my 2 stitches, and again from the top, make 1, knit 1, and from the bottom. For those of you who knit with 2 colors, 1 in each hand, you will pick up the category C one in your right hand and knit throw with that, but I'm not very well versed how to do a lot of things in the throwing method, so forgive me if this looks a little strange, and etc. Right, next piece of advice is that before you do any of the color changes, you have to make sure you stretch out the stitches on your right hand needle to reserve enough of the float length so that it doesn't crumple up and you have good tension. These floats are really short here, so it's not going to be a big issue, but just so you get into the habit, if this is one of your first few colorwork sweaters, or you might not be entirely happy with how your colorwork tension is working out, then that's a, oops, talking and knitting at the same time seems to be impossible. So yeah, always get into the habit of stretching the stitches out and you won't have an issue with uneven tension. Now I will work this row around and get to the steek stitches and come back and show you how we work across those for those of you who do the cardigan option. But for you other ones, you can probably stop watching as soon as you've heard the next piece of advice. Make sure that you don't do the whole chart unless your size is 6, 7, 8, and 9. Your size has a specified number of rows to do in this clue, and that's because not all the sizes need as many increases. So just be careful and follow what the pattern says for your size. I've also added lines in the charts itself to remind you, because otherwise your stitch count will be off. And you will also encounter some rounds where the chart only uses one color, and that's this category C. So in that case, just leave the category A color hanging by the beginning of round marker, and you'll pick it up on the following round again when you need it. Oh, and one more trick is for those of you using magic loop and getting angry when it's harder to manage the tension here at where the loop is. So we can either stop a few stitches before the loop or work all the way to the loop. And when we pull the loop, reinstate the loop, we don't make it here between just worked stitches and stitches to work. We can make it way further away from that point, somewhere far away here among the stitches that we've already worked. So there, it feels like the loop isn't a factor at all. We can still stretch the stitches out on the needle when we are changing colors. So that's been a game changer for me when I discovered it, and it's not entirely obvious, so I'm just sharing that tip with you as well. So for those of us doing the cardigan option with the steek, here I've come to the steek marker and slipped it, and I need to work each stitch in a different color. Regardless of what colors I'm using, I have to make sure that the middle stitch through which I'll be cutting, the adjacent stitches to that middle stitch are different colors, so that with one secure crochet loop that I will be doing before cutting, we touch two different colors. So, and that could be, for example, knitting one with the C color, then knitting one with A, knitting one with C, knitting one with A, C, A, and C. So here we go. In the pattern, it always follows the same pattern for simplicity, so this stitch will always be the same color. So you'll end up with lines along the steek section, but chessboard pattern could also work. So it's entirely up to you. Especially if you've done steeking before, then this is probably not new at all. And we carry on following the chart until all the rows of the chart that are for your size are completed. And then we'll change color to color B and do the last increases. And goes without saying that you should have watched the prep video about all the colors and how to categorize them and what the categories mean. So if you haven't done that yet, this might have been a little confusing, so I highly suggest that you go and do that. The link to that video is in the description. So we get to the short rows, and this is where one of the major differences between the cardigan and pullover option is in the pattern, because of where the beginning of round marker is located. So for the pullover option, it's at the back, and for the cardigan option, it's here at the front, next to the steek section. And because the short rows need to be worked at the back to raise the back, so we're adding more fabric, more length to the back, we need to do a little intermediate step for the cardigan to mark the center of the back. So in the pattern, it specifies how many stitches away from the beginning of round marker we should place a locking marker to indicate where the middle of the back is. So it should have an equal number of stitches from the beginning of round marker to the middle of back, and from the middle of back to the steek marker. So we're ignoring the steek portion here. And then the only other additional step is that for the cardigan, we have to work all the way to the middle of the back before we follow the same instructions as for the pullover option, because the pullover is already here. So first we work a certain number of stitches from the middle of the back to the first turn. And if you are using Japanese short rows that I will demo here, you will need either a hairpin or a locking marker to trap your yarn here. You're welcome to use any other short row method as long as you have the specified number of stitches. You turn the specified number of stitches away from that center of the back. So I am using Japanese short rows. I'm letting my bobby pin dangle here on the wrong side. I'm also slipping the first stitch because that will then reduce the step height between the taller section and the shorter section, and I'll work backwards to the middle of the back marker. And this time I am purling because I want it to look knit on the public side. So let me just get there. And once we're here, of course, we need to slip this marker for the pullover. That will be the beginning of round. And we purl the same number of stitches away from the center of the back again in the other direction to do the other turn. Right, I'm now here, and I can place another hairpin to trap my yarn because I'm using Japanese short rows. If you're doing wrap and turn, you'll be wrapping the yarn around the next stitch or whatever other method you're using. But most importantly, we're now turn, work again, and work back towards the middle of the back. We will slip this marker, and this time we will work to the turn. We'll close the gap there or conceal the turn, or so that we don't get a little hole there. And whichever short row method you're using, you will do different steps. If you're using Japanese short row, then stick with me, I'll show you what to do. Right, so I am at the turning point, and to close the gap, I will lift the yarn that I trapped with the hairpin, place it on my left hand needle, and simply knit together with the next stitch, and that conceals the turn. This also counts as the first stitch worked past the turn, and depending on your size, the pattern will tell you how many stitches past the previous turn you need to work further to do the next turn. For me, that is 9, so I will have done 1, and that is 8 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and again placing my hairpin or whatever you're using to trap the yarn before I turn. You can see that there is more rows here than here, and exactly the same as we did last time. Right, now I am at the turn on the wrong side, and because this is the wrong side and we need to produce a purl stitch here, we do a slightly different way of concealing the turn. We still pick up this needle and we place it on, we pick up the hairpin and make that loop with the trapped yarn, place it on the left hand needle, but instead of knitting together or even purling together, we do a slip, and purl through the back loop because we want that stitch. So purl through the back loop is a bit tricky. I'll do that. Purling through the back loop again, because we insert the needle behind the second stitch from back of the work. We want that second stitch to lean over the loop to completely conceal it, which is why we do a slip, purl, purling through the back loop. And again, that was the first stitch of the 9 that I need to work towards the next turn. And I am trapping the yarn at the turn and that is the first 4 short rows done. We need to repeat the last two more times, and that will be removing 8 stitches more, 9 stitches, or whatever the stitch count is for your size. And then we'll return to work back in the round, and there'll be one interesting way to conceal this turn that we made on the wrong side when we are approaching it from this way. But when I get there, I'll come back and show you how it's done. And after all the short rows are done, we're doing one more round in the color B. And in this last round, we also need to close the last short row gap, which happens to be made on the wrong side, but we're approaching it from still working on the right side. So in this case, we want the last stitch of the shortest portion to lean over that loop. So that will mean we need a knit stitch decrease that leans to the left, and that's SSK. So for that, we'll need to stop 1 stitch before the turn. So we can identify the turn by pulling on the bobby pin and seeing which stitches it's attached to. It happens to be these two, so one before will be this one, and for that SSK we will be slipping that one stitch knitwise, and then because we don't have this loop on the needle we can't slip it, but we can try and place it on here to then slip both back on the left hand needle to knit through the back loop. But that's very tricky because it's very inelastic here, as both of the stitches that it's attached to are still on the needle, so it's very tight. What we can do instead is as I have inserted my right hand needle through that loop, we can just knit through it as we would normally. Well, not normally. I normally knit continental, which is why it doesn't work for me right now. But I knit through that loop. Now I can remove the bobby pin, the hairpin, because I don't need it anymore. And then I can pass that slipped stitch over. As we know, slipping one knitwise, knitting one, and passing the slip stitch over is an alternative to slip, slip, knit. It's also a left-leaning decrease. And here we have that last short row gap closed and concealed, and we can continue knitting it all the way to the beginning of round. And we have completed the first clue. You will probably notice that the neckline is quite wide, and that's okay because we will be picking up stitches and adding a neckband later on. So don't panic if your neckline is looking really wide. It will get sorted. Beginning of the second clue, we return to stranded color work, but this time the colors are inverted. So color A is now the main color, and we are drawing with the color C, which is why we're treating color C as the dominant. And whenever we pick up the main color, we'll pick it up across the top. And when we pick up the color C, we'll be picking it up from the bottom. On the first round, when you start, well, I've done 3-4 rounds here already, but on the first round, it's very helpful to place markers where a pattern repeat starts and ends, and that way you can easily orientate, and then each section that you've sectioned off represents one times repeated chart. And the reason why I stopped on this row to talk about this clue is because this is the first time we encounter a partition of the repeat which is 7 stitches long and is done in one color. So in this color A, I have to now work 7 stitches. If I didn't do anything, I would have a 7 stitch long float in color C running behind, which can be a problem because it can get snag on things and pull the fabric. So we need to trap that float, and the simplest way to do that is to twist the yarns behind the work and continue until all 7 stitches are worked, and that way it's trapped behind one of the strands of the color A, and instead of having being a long loose float, it's half the size. There are a few various ways you can trap these floats. I'm going to show you another one in the next repeat. There's only one per repeat. In this chart, there isn't really a point to doing ladder back jacquard because the floats are never long for more than one row at a time. So the overhead of doing ladder back jacquard doesn't really justify. So here I am again at the place where I need to do 7 stitches in one color, and this time I will be working 3 stitches and without having to let go of the yarns and twist them behind. I can still keep the color on my fingers and insert it as if to knit. Then take the floating yarn, wrap it around the needle, then knit with the color that is in the chart, and then take that floating yarn off and carry on. And here we can see again it's trapped, and this time it's trapped behind two legs. It is the same equivalent as twisting it before working that stitch and after in opposite directions. So here are those are a couple of ways you can trap the long floats. And as a reminder, we're treating the color C as the dominant color, so always picking up from the bottom until you'll see in the chart where all of the rows are in one color. That's when stranded color work section finishes and we start something more exciting and textured. And I'll be back to demo that. One more thing worth mentioning in this glue is that not all of the chart is stranded color work, where it says to cut the colors C and A, actually A, because you will still need the color C in this next bit. That is kind of a derivative of a little bit of mosaic knitting, but slightly modified because the slipped stitches are spanning actually across 4 rows. So if you've done mosaic knitting before, then this won't be anything new, but the way we get the patterning here in this part is by working stripes with 2 different colors. That's color B and color C. And instead of working the stitches in that color, we're achieving the vertical bars by slipping the previously worked stitches. And of course in the chart it shows you exactly which stitches to slip and which to work. And as you can also see here, one of the rows in color C rounds is worked in knit stitches, and the next one is in purl stitches, and that's creating these 2 garter-like ridges here between. The focus of glue 3 is to divide the yoke into body and sleeves, and so there isn't really anything new technically in terms of knitting methods, but just the concept of dividing the yoke into sleeves and body with continuing color work might be not so intuitive. So I'm going to go through that. To help us do that, we need to place some locking markers here to divide to mark where the first sleeve will start and end, and then the same for the second sleeve. So the counts are provided in the pattern, and that is to make it easier for us to focus on following the chart as we work across the color work here, so we don't have to count as well as be mindful of how many stitches in each color we can just work towards the locking marker. When we get there we can remove it. And just to note that here the color work again is inverted. We treat the color A as the dominant color because most of this is in the color C sidebar. So when we get to the first locking marker, we are supposed to put the sleeve stitches on hold, and we'll do that with a tapestry needle and waste yarn. So I'm just going to work the last stitch that I need to reach the marker and remove it and place all of these ones on the waste yarn, including the markers that you placed or might have placed between the chart repeats, because we will continue the same color work on some of the sleeve as well, so they will come in handy then. Now I've reached the end of the sleeve. I can remove this marker again. And of course, if you prefer barber cords to waste yarn, that is of course another way to put stitches on hold, or you can put them on a spare set of circular needles, whatever is easiest for you. I love the waste yarn option because I can just tie it and there's nothing getting in my way but a little thread. And so right, once the sleeve stitches are on hold, we can continue connecting the body, so the front and the back. And here we'll need to add some stitches to complete the underarm. And for each size, it specifies how many stitches to add. If you're still working on the chart and you have two colors in the chart row, you'll have to use both colors to get to the other side of the body, because we'll need to continue working color work with both of the colors. If you are on a chart row that only has one color, then you just have one strand at your disposal. So if you are that lucky, then you can use a backward loop cast on, just like we did for the make one increases, and you do as many as you need to. Place a marker for the side and continue on and join. I'm just demoing the backward loop cast on. This is not any, you can continue working with that one color that you have. My size, I still have two colors here, so I'll be using a cast on that uses two strands and just happens to be the long tail cast on. I like to twist the stitches here to secure the floats and minimize holes forming, and we just use the long tail cast on. So whichever color you will have across your index finger will be the color that's used to that makes the stitch. So if you want the underarm area to be dark, because predominantly using dark sea color, then put that across your index finger. If you want it to be light, then of course put that over index finger. And I have to cast on 8 stitches and place a side marker followed by another 8 stitches, and that's when I can join the, in my case I'm joining the back because I'm working on the cardigan option, but if you are working on the pullover option, then you'll of course be joining the front. What's important to know is that here at the side marker, we'll reserve 1 stitch after it to act as a fake seam. We'll be purling that with whatever is the main color or predominant color in each of the charts. And that will act as a break between the front and the back, or the back and the front, which means that the chart repeats here on the sides of the side marker will not be complete. So you'll run out of stitches before you can complete a repeat. And symmetrically, you'll have to start with somewhere in the middle of the chart repeat to make sure that your pattern aligns with the stitches that already exist. So that's what the pattern specifies in the next round. It'll tell you when you get to the side marker, purl 1 and look at which starting stitch you have to start with to ensure that you align with the existing stitches. Now, if you're using an app to follow the chart, you probably have some way to annotate the chart, and so you can draw a little line there to remind you where you're starting. For the sizes that have even number of pattern repeats around the body, around the yoke, you'll have the same starting stitch on both sides, but for the sizes where you had an odd number of chart repeats around the yoke, you will unfortunately have different starting points because one of the pattern repeats it's offset by a half a repeat on both sides. And of course we'll do exactly the same on the other side for the other sleeve, and we'll continue in the round, making sure we do the purl seam and following the chart until we complete all of this clue 3 chart. And then we'll turn on to something a little bit different. As part of this clue, we also have to attach the neckband, and that is for people who want to do the neck part before deciding how long they want the yoke to be, and so adjust it accordingly so they can do this before splitting the sleeves. I personally like to do it after splitting the sleeves, because then I see how the rest of the sweater sits on my shoulders, and if I need to do any adjustments in the neckline, and then I can also see how high or low I want it to be. But it's entirely a personal preference, so which is why I've included in the same clue as separating the sleeves, so you can manage that order. And the difference between the pullover option and the cardigan option will be that the pullover will be worked in the round. We don't have to take care of anything in preparation for cutting, but because the cardigan has that steeked center here, we will be working there's no point in us knitting the steek section, because we'll cut that anyway. So we'll do the cardigan neckband flat. And for the pullover option, we just need to find this little cast on end and insert the needle right in the first stitch there, which will be for the pullover option at the back, and pick up and knit every single stitch that we have cast on in the first clue. So yeah, I'll bring this closer. We have to find this tail here. If you use Longdale cast on, if you use another cast on, you'd probably have a different way to identify the first stitch that you cast on, or it might even be the last stitch. But from this direction, it's the first stitch, so we just insert the needle in that first stitch, pick up and knit, and then move on to the next one and to the next one. The reason I don't like putting the needle underneath the legs of the loops that join these stitches is because then I'm getting an offset, but that's a minor kind of annoyance that I have. So you can pick up stitches the way you're used to here. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have a multiple of 4s for the pullover. And for the cardigan, we'll do a little bit differently. Also note that we are using smaller needles here because we want the neckband to be a little denser, because so much weight is pulling on it the rest of the sweater. So we needed a little smaller needle. I've gone down a size or 2 depending on how you measure. So I'm using 4mm for my main body, and these are 3.5s. And the color is color D, the framing color. So I will demo the actual picking up as I go for my cardigan, but first we need to explain how the cardigan neckband will fit. So we won't be starting with the first stitch that we have here at the beginning of round, because we don't want to knit across these steek stitches, so we'll skip the first 6. You know, we had a total of 7 steek stitches here, so we'll skip the first 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll start with the 7th, because we do want to have just one selvage stitch on either side of the steek before starting the real neckband pattern, because when we go and add the button bands, we will need something to pick up the stitches for the button band against. So we enter in the 7th stitch and pick up and knit, and then we, just like for the pullover, again find the next stitch that we cast on. This is where having the long tail cast on being done on 2 needles is very useful because it's very easy for me to do this picking up of stitches. My first round of those stitches is quite loose and spread out, and I can do this without too much struggle. So I'll go all the way around, but as you can probably imagine, I will then actually join this first stitch to be the last stitch of the row, and that will leave me with 5 stitches here at the in the center of the cardigan unpicked, and we'll just be working back and forth across that. And we'll be working a 2x2 rib pattern, which is why the pullover needs a multiple of 4s and the cardigan needs a multiple of 4s plus 2 for those 2 selvage stitches. So if you didn't exactly pick up the right number of stitches in the first pass, then on the setup row or the next round for the pullover, feel free to decrease some so you get that multiple of 4 or multiple of 4 plus 2. So when I get to the rib, 2x2 rib, we're working this to double height because it will be a folded neckband for the sample. You can of course leave it as a single layer, so you will stop at the desired height and bind off using your preferred bind off. But I like that if a sweater is a little thicker, so in this case it's more a worsted weight sweater, that the neckband is a little bit more sturdy and impactful. So I love to use the double to the folded neckband in that instance. But again, because it's added last, anything goes. You can make it a 1x1 rib or a twisted rib or seed stitch or whatever stitch you like, or whatever stitch pattern you prefer. It's up to you. So yeah, let your creativity shine here. But I'll see you back when I've done the height of this neckband, and to show you how, if you wanted to do the double neckband, how that can be done in 2 ways. And once we've got the neckband to double the height that we want, it's time to join these live stitches to the base and bind off at the same time. And the pattern describes one way of doing that, which involves a spare needle, which then we use to pick up the stitches from the first row. Make sure that we're facing the wrong side, not the right side in this case, and we just go and pick up all of the stitches that we knit in the first row. So this time we just pick up without knitting 1 stitch for every stitch. We can do all of them around, or we can do this in sections. And when we got those stitches here, we'll knit them together with the live stitches correspondingly 1 to 1 and bind off at the same time. And because this can be very tight here, we need to use a larger needle to make it looser. Otherwise we risk that the the neckband isn't going to lay flat on our neck, but rather stands up because it's so cinched here near the base, which is why we need to use a larger needle to do the bind off. And here we go. Knit through 2 of the loops. However they're mounted, it doesn't really matter whether you knit through the back loop or the front loop on the second needle on that spare needle. For the first stitch we just need to knit 1, but then with every next one we knit both together, and then we pass that first stitch over the second one to bind off. And I even want to tug on it to stretch out that loop that we created, because it will be lying horizontally like that, and we needed to cover the stitch width so that it's not too tight, which is also helps with the collar to lay flat. And here we go, a few more like that. There's no point in doing this in pattern, even though it's a 2x2 rib, because no one can really see on the inside, and secondly, it doesn't, the loop that lies over the stitch hides what it was worked anyway, so it doesn't matter. We can knit all of them without worrying about being in pattern here. And then when I run out of the stitches on the spare needle, I can go back and pick up some more, or I'll show you the alternative way. And, well, this is what it looks like. We'll have a little hole here in the tube, which we can close with a tapestry needle later after we've added the button band, or for if you're doing a pullover, you won't have any issues because you're working in the round. My personal preferred way here is, though, to do it at the same time. So instead of using a spare needle to pick up the stitches, we just pick them up as we go. So I'll pick up one here, put it on the needle, knit together, and pass that stitch over, and again go back here, pick up the one, knit together, pass. Just make sure that when you have a purl stitch here, the first stitch on the live stitches, that you pick the first of the knit stitches so that you stay vertically aligned with the bottom and we don't have a slightly skewed neckband. But all in all, these are the two ways to achieve this double neckband. We start clue with another interesting textured stitch that isn't stranded color work, and that is really made of a few rows where things happen. And the first row where things get interesting is the first row of the chart, where we are supposed to follow a pattern of slipping a few stitches and purling a few stitches, and the slipping in this case happens with the yarn in front, creating a long float like that. And in order for us to not lose the stitch gauge, we still have to be careful that when we slip these three, we have to stretch the stitches out before continuing with the purling. And that will mean that this float here isn't going to tighten the work, creating a bumpy looking sweater where some things are narrower and some things are wider. So as much as possible, let's keep the same stitch gauge by stretching them out, and we go all the way around, slipping 3 and purling 3. And we'll do that for 2 rows, followed by a few plain rows in the color B of just stockinette, and then I'll come back and show you what we'll do with these loose strands, as they're called. And when we encounter that little weird arrowy like symbol that's described as knit 1 or K1 ulls, meaning under loose strands, if they exist here. So the way we carry that out is we pick up these loose strands before we knit into the stitch, and we also pull it out from under these loose strands. So we do that for every loose strand encountered. We make sure that we are in the center one of the 3 that we slipped, and if you are a thrower, it would look something like this. something like that, not exactly like that, but I hope you get the point. It all doesn't matter where you hold your yarn, it matters how the needle, the active needle behaves. I'll just demo that one more time. Of course, you can rewind and look at this in slow motion as many times as necessary, but this should be quite intuitive once you get going, and it's a lot of fun, and it creates a kind of a 3D interesting texture and shape as well. Let's say you've decided to do the shaped waist option instead of the straight fit, and it's time for you to start doing the decreases. It's up to you where you begin them, because that will be very individual. It would be it could be either at the fullest bust point or at the underbust. For me, it's at the underbust, but wherever you start them, the concept's the same. We'll work in the established pattern to the side marker. And then with whichever color is in the chart for the next stitch, we simply do an SSK and we eliminate that stitch that is next to the fake seam. We'll slip the marker, and then we decide which color is the non-dominant to do the purling. And again, this case we need to find a new starting stitch before we continue. I started with stitch 24 for me, but because we're eliminating a stitch, that stitch doesn't exist anymore, so I need to go to the next stitch, and for me that will be stitch number 1, and it happens to be in the light color as well. So with that color I will do knit 2 together. Of course, if you're working in the slip stitch sections and you're only working with one color, you don't need to worry about choosing the color to do the decreases with. But if you're in the stranded portion, then you've got to bear in mind that every time you decrease, the starting stitch will be moving up by 1. So from 24 to 1, from 1 to 2, etc. after every decrease. And that's on both sides. So if your starting stitch is different on either side, then you will also basically change both of them. And you will then have to measure yourself from the point of where you start the decrease to your waist and pick the instruction according to which range your measurement falls in. So there are 3 ranges offered, and they all that they do is differ in how many stitches you decrease and what the decrease cadence is. So either every 5, every 7, or every 8 rounds you repeat the same thing. Because we're using stranded color work as well as slip stitch parts, which you will probably notice here, especially if you're doing the cardigan option, that you're getting a little bit of a 3D effect here, and that's because the slipping of the stitches is scrunching up the height of the fabric. And what that means is that the row gauge is very different between the stranded color work and the slipped stitch parts, and some are more severely different than others. So you will see that the first slip stitch section in clue 4, you will have to skip or ignore one of every 3 rounds. So instead of 3 rounds, we only count 2 rounds towards the decrease placement. And we just knit 1, ignoring that it exists. And in the other section that will come later after this stranded color work, it will be very similar to what we had previously, where we slip across 4 rows. That's even more severe because there's also some garter sections, and in this case we ignore 1 out of 2 rows. So basically it's half. For every 2 rows, just count 1. I hope that makes sense. So if I'm doing a decrease in this section and I need to do decrease every every 7 or every 7 rounds, and 6 of those fall in here. I will only be counting 4 instead of 6 because I need to ignore 2 of those 6, or 1 out of 3. And that's written in the pattern, so you can keep that in mind. Of course, it's not going to be the end of the world if you forget to. You'll just decrease the spacing between the decreases in absolute terms, in centimeters and inches, will be slightly different by a centimeter or so. So it's not actually that huge a deal. If you find this too complicated to follow, you can do the decreases maybe evenly, but a little bit more spaced out to account for this row gauge difference. But yeah, and that's it. I think that's all there is about the waist shaping decreases. After clue 5 is done, we are ready to do the sleeves, and presumably you have already transferred the stitches that were on hold on the larger needle, and we're ready to begin. I like to begin with the live stitches here, and we'll need to find the same category yarns that were used in clue 3, so chart 3. Hopefully you still have the same yarns available. I do have a little bit here of these I held double, but as I'm using dyed in the wool, that is color changing yarn, I'm not going to get exactly the same for this category C because it's already gone to a different shade, but that I'm not too worried because it's very quite similar. So then we also need to find the row that we did the separation, and for my size that was row 12 of that chart. And for each size we have a specific stitch number of the chart to begin with. You'll notice that if you have if you had in the yoke an even number of pattern repeats, and you're working on the pullover or cardigan option, it doesn't matter, you'll always have the same starting stitch for the both sleeves. But if you had an odd number, then your starting stitch will change, also depending on whether you're working on the pullover or cardigan option, because we're basically offset by half a repeat here. So I am supposed to start with stitch number 20 of row 12, and I will secure my yarn with a little extra slip knot here so that it doesn't move. I'll remove it in the next round, and I just happen to have to work it in category C color, and then I'll immediately join the category A, which happens to be the next stitch in the chart on that row. So I'll have to get rid of 2 loops next round. And I am back to here. We again treat the category A as the dominant. So I'm gonna have to take category C over the top there, work 5 stitches, and etc. Follow the chart basically. And the fun starts when we get to the other end, so I'll try and get there quickly. After we worked all the stitches that were on the needles, we get to this corner that's between the live stitches and the cast on stitches here at the underarm. And usually to avoid a hole, I like to pick up an extra stitch, at least 1, sometimes even 2 if it's stretched so much, but in this case I think I'll be okay with 1. And we use the strand that is not treated as the dominant, so the kind of background in the chart, and that's in this case category C, to pick up that 1 stitch here in the corner. I like to twist it to pull everything together and work that this way. I mean, if you see a big hole, you can choose another strand that maybe will conceal the hole better. I mean, maybe that will work better for me here. And then we proceed to picking up one stitch for every stitch that was cast on here at the underarm. Again, working that with the category C yarn in this case. We should insert the needle through that first row or round of the cast on stitches through that stitch. So I can find these were the loops of the that sit under the stitch, and where I want to insert is through that category C loop. And I need, for my size, I need to pick up 8 stitches until I get to the center of the underarm, where I'll place the beginning of round marker. And another thing we need to remember is that while we do that, we have to carry this other color with us by trapping. So we can just twist them like that and carry on. So that was 1, 2, 3. It's a little tricky. There's lots of strands there. You could pick up something unwanted, but that's okay. It's at the underarm, so no one will ever know if it's not perfect. Okay, I have now lost count. This was the one I picked up in the corner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Need 3 more. It's a good time to trap, probably. One, 2, and the last one will coincide with the purl stitch because we're in the opposite direction. That was the first stitch after the marker, and it will be the last stitch before the marker in this direction. So we add the marker. So yeah, it is offset by 1, but it's just to keep the maths and instructions simple here. And we need to pick up 8 more in the other direction to meet the other side, continuing to trap this other color. And when we get there again, we'll pick up another strand and twist it in the corner there and join in the round. Obviously, I'll get rid of these little slip knots because they're not real stitches at that time as well. And we do another round following the next row of the chart. And if for any reason you actually completed the chart 3 before at this point, you can get on to chart 4 in clue 4 and follow that. It will be the same starting stitch, it will just be the next row as it continues. But this time we'll stop at the beginning of round and we'll set a new pattern there. We'll be purling the first stitch after the beginning of round and then working the chart starting with the second stitch of the sleeve, but we'll have a new starting stitch because we now have this much more of the area to cover with the chart. So of course the starting stitch will be offset backwards, and so you'll have a new one to begin with for however many rounds the pattern says until your first decrease. So if you want to make the sleeves longer, this is also the place where you can add more rows before starting the decreases. Or if you want the sleeve shorter, you can remove some rows if your size has rows to remove, to remove. And then I'll come back and we'll talk about the decreases. One important thing for the decreases of the sleeves that I need to mention is the fact that the gauge, the row gauge specifically, is slightly different between the Colourwork parts and these slip stitch parts. That will play a little bit of a role in how we count the rows for the decreases. So for example, we start from the underarm, and for my size it says to work 7 rounds, but as I have mentioned in the pattern, the slip stitch section that has these knit one under loose strands, we have to only count 2 out of every 3 rows. So instead of it being 12 rows tall, it's actually only 8 rows tall. So the way I count that when I'm in this section, I simply ignore completely the rows that are worked using the category C color. So when you see the slip stitches, just do them as they are in the chart, and they make this 3D shape and the look, but do not count them in as part of the decrease cadence. So completely ignore them in the length count. And when we get to the slip stitch part where we have these 2 garter rows between these slipped between the stockinette rows, that one is much easier. We just need to count 1 out of 2. So we work 1, ignore 1, work 1, ignore 1, and that will give us the correct length between the sleeve decreases. So I have worked the first part of the sleeve to my first decrease where I need it to be, and the decreases are done in such a way whenever you encounter a decrease round that we purl the first stitch with the color that is not treated as dominant. So I happen to be in a chart section which is worked in one color throughout, so there's no dilemma for me. But if you're still in the color work position, pick the one that's the backgroundy one as you would do the purl stitch, so that doesn't change. We always start with the same stitch number from in the chart here, but on the decrease round that will change because we're getting rid of 1 stitch. So we need to start with 1 stitch higher. So if I had a 12, I'll be starting with 13, and that's also the color that I need to choose. So the 1 stitch higher is the color that I need to use to work these 2 stitches together as knit 2 together. So because I'm working with 1 color, it's not an issue. I don't have to break my head there, but for if you are, then just imagine that stitch is no longer there and work the next stitch in the chart, and that will be your new starting stitch position. And then we work all the way around to 2 stitches before beginning of round, and instead of working both of them, we work SSK again in the color that we would work that stitch. So there is no head breaking there. It's just the next stitch in the chart, and then we work as many rounds as specified for your size. Again in the round without decreases until you get to the next decrease round, and the starting stitch will be the new starting stitch, and when we do the decrease we change the starting stitch again. Now a little bit about the chart sequence. So after we finish the chart 3, we move on to chart 4, and then we move on to chart 5, and then we move on to chart 4, chart 5, however long you need it to be. So for my body I only repeated chart 4 once, but I suspect my sleeve will be longer, so after I've completed chart 4 the second time, I'll do chart 5 again. And you're welcome to stop anywhere mid-chart as long as the sleeve length is reached, or your desired length, that is 2 inches or 5 centimeters short of desired length, so that you can do the cuff, and that will be your sleeve done. If you're watching this, chances are you made the cardigan version and you are ready to do the front opening. And well done for getting this far in the project. The way we'll do that is we'll first attach the button bands on both sides before then going ahead securing the steek and cutting it. And we do that because we don't want to disturb too much the steek area after it's been cut. because as you know, picking up stitches can be a little messy, and we twist and turn the fabric and pull on strands, so we don't want to do that once it's been cut, which is why we do that ahead. And those of you who are a little bit apprehensive about the steek, it just gives you a little bit peace of mind that it's not yet, we're not doing the cutting yet. And you'll need to do this, well, this is optional, but if you're doing it for the first time, it can be helpful to have some contrasting, a color that you haven't used in the project yet, yarn for just marking both where we'll be picking up stitches for the button bands as well as where we'll be cutting, just to guide you through. And we'll also need the needles, of course, for the button bands, the buttons themselves to try through the buttonhole when we make it. We'll need a crochet hook that is suitable for this yarn that you'll use to secure the steek, and I recommend you use a woolly yarn that's a little bit more sticky, so it felts, well, it has a chance of felting instead of superwash, but it should be smooth yarn, and a crochet hook that's suitable for that yarn. It should not be bigger than the needle size. If anything, it should be smaller because we want it to be quite tight. And if you are working with leftover yarn and some of it is slippery with some silk mixed in, or it's superwash, then you'll also need some ribbon that will be attaching on the inside of the cardigan to kind of hide the cut and protect it from the elements and wear and tear. And you'll need also some scissors, of course, and some dressmaker pins, or what are these called, berry pins, head pins, to just keep the ribbon down while we attach it, and also a sewing thread in a color that matches the ribbon. So we'll start first with picking up the stitches for the button bands, and as we're not picking up along an edge, but instead we're picking up along on top of in the middle of the fabric, it can be helpful to mark where we'll be picking up. We'll be picking up on both sides of the steek, and the button holes are on the right side for this cardigan, but you could also, of course, swap that around and put them on the left side if that's what you prefer. It's just written for the right side, but whichever side you choose to do the buttonhole, the method will work on both sides the same way. I will start with the left side, and that's the side that doesn't have buttonholes, because we'll take one step at a time. And we need to identify, so if this was the direction of knitting, we need to identify the last steek stitch, and we need to make sure there are 7 stitches in the steek section. That's how many we had. And so for me it's in the category C, so that was the dark. I know that this is the last steek stitch, so we'll be picking up between the last steek stitch and the beginning of round. It's quite easy on the left side because you'll see there's this little jog as it is a beginning of round. We'll also encounter a lot of looser strands because that's where usually we change the colors. But before we start marking it here, we actually need to incorporate the neckband as well, because the button band will go all the way up to the top of the neckband. Because this is a double layer neckband for me, I chose to make that version. We need to find the actual top of the, well, I won't be marking this because there's no dilemma here. I will just picking up the strands between the edge stitch and the second stitch column here. But where it gets tricky is when we have just we have to find something in the middle of the fabric. So that's why I'll be marking along this last steek stitch, and we try and use a color that we haven't used in the project so that we can remove it. And we just use a running stitch to do that. Careful not to pick up other fabric at the back. And we do this all the way to the end. It will be quite a lot easier in the non colorwork sections because it's more intuitive there, because there's a big difference between the stockinette and the rest of the stitch pattern that we see, remembering that the direction of knitting was going upwards. And if you follow the pattern, then in sections where the background is lighter, you'll have the lighter color as the last steek stitch, and in sections where the background was darker, you'll have the darker color as the last steek stitch to mark. And when we get to the hem, really have to carefully follow through that stitch column, because it is kind of in the middle of stockinette without any reference points. So that's that. Now we can begin picking up the stitches. So I've got my color category D that I used for hem and cuffs, and I'll begin, and we're using the smaller needle here because we want the button band to be a bit sturdier than the main fabric. And I'll secure the yarn so it doesn't move around. I will remove this slip knot later. And as I said, I'll begin here at the top, just picking up between the edge stitch and the second stitch column. I can see the second stitch is this little loop, so I want to pick up the leg just outside that loop, and I will move down to where the main yoke starts, only picking along the outside layer of the button band if your button band has 2 layers, and then we'll just seam the inner layer down once we've finished it, as part of the finishing, because we don't necessarily want this hole to remain open. But for the purpose of the button band, we need to just pick up stitches along the outside layer of the button band. We pick up 1 stitch for every row, or you can also skip a few if you wish. I'll be knitting quite tightly around there so it doesn't flare out. And here we hit the main yoke that was worked in the round, so we have to find the base of, this is the cast on round. I kind of want to find a single strand to pick up a stitch there, and then we follow the path that we marked by picking up a single stitch for every row, and that works in the stranded colorwork sections. So I picked that up, and now next one is that. It's easy to choose the strands when there's 2 stitches of the same color next to each other, but because this is stranded colorwork, we'll encounter some instances where the stitches are not the same color, so the leg is not as obvious, and you get to kind of choose which color leg you pick up. Like here, for example, this stitch is a light color and the stitch here on the steek is dark, so I get to pick which leg I want. Oh, I already did that previously. Here both legs are dark, so this is the situation I'm talking about. the leg between these two stitches. There's actually two legs, one is light and one is dark because they're two different colors, and I would like to stick to the same color, that is the last steek stitch, just to make less decisions, having to make less decisions, and if I'm consistent that way, at least I'll get a consistent look. So there we go. And we also do the same across this stockinette short row part. For some sizes it's a bit longer than for me, my second size. So again, one stitch for every row worked. And I kind of forget that some places I held the yarn double, so I gotta have two strands that I'm picking up. Now I have the steek stitch light color, so I'll be picking up the light legs as I go along here. And it doesn't matter which side the marking yarn is, because we'll be removing it anyway. So we can leave it either on the right or the front or the back of your pickup. The one thing we need to keep in mind is that we can't keep picking up one stitch for every row throughout the entire length of the body, because as you can see, these bits are already bulging. We don't want that bulge to carry into the button bands. And if you remember, then whenever we had some shaping, waist shaping or decrease for sleeves, we treated these sections in the chart slightly differently. We were ignoring some rows for the decreased cadence counts. So we'll do the same also for the button band, in that we'll only be picking up 1 out of 2 rows in these slip stitch sections. So that means when I encounter these, where is it now? I only need to pick up around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 stitches in this region. There we go. I will manage. One in color C. Whew, that was a hard one. And skip the next color C, pick up another one in color C, and then one in color B. Because if you remember, we worked 2 rounds of this color here. And 2 more in color C across this garter section, and finally final color B. So there we go. It's not going to be bulging. We've decreased the number of stitches that we pick up here by half, and we continue with the pickup all the way to the end, and hopefully we have a stitch count that is a multiple of 4, because we need that for the 2x2 rib, which you can work to your desired height or width of the button band and bind off using your preferred bind off. I'll be binding off the same way as I did the hem, which is just the classic pass stitch over bind off. And if you feel like picking up is getting very, very tricky for you, I find what helps for me, especially in these instances where we are picking up in the middle of fabric and we've got 2 colors going, is just simply take the other needle and slide it under the fabric there. You will, and just along the same road that we marked, you will pick up a lot more strands that you need to. But we made the decision to only use the color of the last steek stitch. So I know that I only need to knit through the strands that are in that color, and I can simply slip off the other color. And having this other needle there is just making everything a lot easier. Again, I don't need the darker color, but I am interested in this leg here, the lighter color. Again, slip off the ones I don't need, and then it just becomes kind of like knitting. And when you run out of stitches, go back, find that road between the two stitch columns that we marked, and do the same thing. I think I'm missing one here. Yes. Again, slip off the darkers or lighters, whichever is your last steek stitch, and knit through the strands that remain. This is much easier, at least for me. I'm not sure how it feels if you're a thrower, if it's easier or harder, but having that extra needle can help here stretch the fabric in the right direction for you. And we don't care how it looks on this side, because this side will not be visible, but we care that this part is quite neat. Sometimes it can get very confusing to what to pick and what not to. So I like to follow the path of the leg of the stitch. So in this case, it's the steek stitch. So we find that last steek stitch column that we marked, and we look at how it goes. So it starts here, it goes around and comes back in there. And we know that that leg continues somewhere behind this one. We could just lift that leg and see, there it is. That's the leg that I need to pick up next, because I have already picked the previous one. So I need to pick up this one, and again, follow the stitch. The leg is gonna come out here behind that lower stitch, and that's the one that we pick. So I hope that helps. After you've bound off the button band, it should look something like this, like a little flap attached to the front of the cardigan. It should lay somewhat flat. I know that I will be blocking this, and it will grow a little bit in length. But if your button band does not lay flat, then your button band will be wavy when you wear it as well. And one way to fix it is to either bind off even tighter, because that will bring the outer edge closer together and will help with some of that, and so the fabric will be bunched up a little bit more. Or you could go down even another needle size, or use a yarn that's thinner. So let's say if you are holding two fingering weights together for this one, maybe substitute the fingering weight, one of them with the lace weight, if that's an option, or use a DK weight yarn. I know it's supposed to be the same as the hem and cuffs and the neckband, but if you're in that situation, then the colors matching will not be as noticed as the wavy button band, so it's better to fix that before we get too far. But I am confident that mine is laying flat, and it will be even more flush when I've blocked the sweater. So it's time to do the other side, and we pretty much do everything the same way, except this time when we mark, we'll start from the bottom, and here it's very difficult to find where we're supposed to follow, so marking is even more important. And we could start the marking here where it was easier to find, that last steek stitch, and but I think I'm I'm going to be able to follow that column along here, and I believe it should coincide. Yes, so here we go. It's going to be between the knit stitch and the purl stitch. It might not be the case for you. It depends on how many stitches you had, but in this case the knitting direction was that way, so the loops go like that. It's the only difference. And again, once we've done marking it the entire length, we will again do the pickup all the way up to the top of the button band. And this time when we turn it around and do the setup row, sorry, you gotta ensure that you have as many stitches for this side as you did for that. Otherwise your button bands will not be, I guess you could probably get away with having more stitches on the button band with the buttonholes, because it will be over, it will be laying over the one underneath with the buttons attached. But if it's the other way around, then you don't want the edges of this button band with the buttons to peek out on both ends. That's not necessarily a good look. So ensure that you have as many stitches for the other side by doing some decreases. And what I mean by decreases is just like we did here for the neck band. I did end up reducing every 1 out of 4 stitches here to prevent it from flaring out. We can sneak in some decreases throughout the setup row by either knitting together some of the knit stitches or purling together some of the purl stitches, and that way we ensure that both button bands are exactly the same, well, what's it, height, length, width, depends on how you look at it. So that's it. When we've done a few rows of the other button band, we'll return to see how to add a buttonhole and how to space the buttonholes. After having worked nearly half of the button band width, it's time to add the button bands. And depending on how many buttons you choose and how big your buttons are, you will be spacing them evenly along the length of that button band, leaving a little bit here on both ends. And what's important in this pattern for the 1 row buttonhole that we'll be using is that the buttonhole should start with the second stitch of the pair of purl stitches. That way it will just cut across this knit column here and cleanly join on both ends. I've tried to start it later. It doesn't look as great because of the cable cast on that's used. It sort of distorts the knit column, and this one was the cleanest way. If you're using a different button band, different buttonhole method, then this is not so important. But if you're following the pattern that uses 1 row buttonholes, then the buttonhole should be placed, the starting stitch of the buttonhole should be the second of the 2 purl stitches in the 2x2 rib pattern. And I have got 6 buttons, so I will need to place 6 locking markers along the button band. I do have a separate video where I explain the maths for this if you want to be super precise with your placement. But I think that because we've already worked 1 button band, you can just sort of place them and count approximately that the knit columns between each one are kind of similar. I couldn't get them to match all perfectly, so they are placed slightly closer here at the top and then slightly more dispersed. So I've got 24 stitches between the first 2 and then 28 stitches, because it's got to be a multiple of 4 between them to land on the second of the purl stitches every time. So once you've got those button markers placed, it's time to then do the buttonhole. buttonhole row. So this row is going to be the row in which we do all the buttonholes. And you should have your button handy as well to try if it will fit through. So I will work in the established pattern to my first buttonhole marker. Oops. And here it is. Put the yarn in front and slip that stitch. Then bring the yarn back. But without working, we slip the next stitch with the yarn in back and pass the first slip stitch over. We do that again, slip the next stitch, pass it over, and then third time. So these are the 3 stitches that we have bound off. Before continuing with the row, we'll put that stitch temporarily back on the left hand needle and turn our work, and immediately pick up the yarn that we left here on the other end, and with a cable cast on the missing stitches. So cable cast on purlwise, because we don't want purl bumps on the right side. We'll insert the needle between the 2 stitches here from back to front like so, purl and pull it out, twist it and place it on the left hand needle. And now we'll place the needle between the first and second stitch, so that's the newly cast on stitch and the existing stitch, again from back to front, wrap around as if to purl, pull it out, and again twist it and place it on the needle. So I've done 2. Technically it should be enough to just do 3, so this is my 3rd one, but we'll do a 4th one, and we will not need to place it on the left hand needle, because we'll turn the work back to face the right side, and we will immediately decrease it with the next stitch to join them in a neater way. So I will be doing a purl 2 together here, so to align with the purl column here. And that's our button band. Let me just do a few more stitches. Sorry, buttonhole. And let's try if my button will fit through. I'm not sure these will be my final buttons that I use, but this will be the size. And it's a 1 inch or 25 millimeter button, and it does fit through. If it doesn't fit through, if it's too small, you could try doing the cable cast on slightly looser. You could also try and band off more stitches and then cast on more stitches to fit a bigger button through. And that's also a solution. If the buttonhole is too big, then binding off and casting on less stitches doesn't really make sense. In that case, you should opt for the yarn over and knit 2 together, or purl 2 together. I'll just demo that here. Those should be across the 2 purl stitches. So starting with the first purl stitch, we simply yarn over and purl 2 together. And then that will be super neat, uninterrupting the knit stitch columns, and just sit between the purl stitches. So that is if your buttons are smaller and this 3 stitch buttonhole is too big. And basically we just repeat what we just did here for the first buttonhole throughout the entire buttonhole row for every marker that we placed, and work the rest of the button band the same way we did the other side and bind off. After both button bands have been added, we are ready to attend to the steek, and we'll start by marking the central column, so it should be the full stitch. So you can start from the top of the neck, because we were knitting top down, and we should find the central column in the steek area, which in the Colourwork section is quite easy because you can see the middle of the 3 stitches. And you follow that throughout the entire length of the cardigan, all the way to the bottom, and then you'll see that everything here is in one color. It's a little bit trickier, but if you follow the same column of stitches, it should be straightforward. And then we grab our crochet hook and our sticky yarn, and we make a little slip knot, and we'll do some crocheting and put that slip knot on the hook there. I'm not really a great crocheter, so if you are have never crocheted before, then perhaps watching a few beginner crochet tutorials online could be helpful. There are many ways to hold the crochet hook. I hold mine this way, but I have seen people hold it that way as well. So find your way, and it's not super difficult, because all we need to do is push the crochet hook through the fabric, wrap the yarn around and pull it out, and pull it through the loop that is already on the crochet hook. And so we'll start that by here at the very top. So the way we'll work is we'll secure the yarn along the top here, and then we will be working down, making a crochet ridge all the way down on this side of the central stitch. And then when we get to the bottom, we'll break yarn, we'll do a little corner, and then we'll do the same on the opposite way. So starting from here all the way back up to the top. Right, so how it goes is we find a place to stick our crochet hook in the top somewhere. So this is just us securing the yarn near the top for a couple of chains. What are they called? I'm not even sure what the real name of these stitches. And what we need to find, we'll be crocheting together the two legs of two different stitches. So in the Colourwork section, it's easy to see because they should all be different, both be different colors. We shouldn't be crocheting just the legs of stitches in one color. That is in the Colourwork section. So we have to find, and it's easy to kind of fold it, pinch it, and the legs become apparent. The first round we did in one color, so both legs will obviously be in that color, but you can see, my goodness, you can see here later on when we introduce the second color, the legs will be in two different colors. But we need to include the first round, so we'll put it under the two legs like so, and then wrap the yarn around the hook, pull it through those legs, and then also pull it through the existing loop. And we do that again under the two legs, pull through, and pull through the existing loop. And it becomes quite smooth and easy, especially in the Colourwork section, because you can see where to put your needle quite easily. I mean the hook. And when we get to the sections that are in one color, we just keep going the same way. If you have pinched, sometimes the marking thread is splitting the yarn, but yeah. So we carry on all the way down to the bottom, and I'll show you what we do when we get there. It should look something like this. And when we get to the other side, we have to make sure that we turn away from the center. We shouldn't be crossing in that direction, because this is where we'll be cutting. So we don't want to cut through this securing strands, the securing yarn. So we have to turn the corner away from the center, do a few of these chains to really secure the yarn. then we can cut it and pull it through the last hoop. And then we turn it around and do exactly the same that we did on the other side. And then we'll cut. Okay, the moment is finally here to cut through the center of the front to get our cardigan opening. Your secured steek should look something like this. You should be able to spread and see clearly that there are these crochet loops on each side of the middle, that middle center stitch. And we shouldn't see the securing steek yarn obstructing the way where we'll be cutting. We'll need sharp scissors and snip. Do it one stitch at a time, one row at a time. And be careful not to cut through the steeked, the secure steek yarn, because then you might have to figure out how to fix it. I haven't done that before, so I'm not sure, but it's not. Oh, one thing I forgot is to take out that marking thing. We don't need that anymore. If anything, it'll just get in our way. So there we go. And this is what the cut edges look like. Very quite sturdy already, but I am using superwash wool and all sorts of other blends that are slippery. So my yarn mix is a bit of a kitchen sink, so I will not leave it untreated, bare like this. I will be adding a ribbon, and I'll show you how I do that in case you are worried about your steek holding. Let me cut this all the way down and I'll come back and add the ribbon. And voila, this is what it looks like when it's all cut open. It's already quite a nice sturdy edge, but for those of us who used superwash yarns, it might be useful to add some more security to keep this from ever unraveling. And I will begin demoing how to add that ribbon on this side, because I'm also a bit lazy and I don't feel like weaving in all these ends. So I will just use the opportunity to tuck them into this fold, away from sight and away from any wear and tear damage. I'll just cut them a little shorter, because the only thing that I am worried about is creating more bulk that I want to see along the side of the button band. But it will just have to, if it is bulky, I'm happy to live with that more than wanting to go and weave in all these ends. The things that we'll need for adding the ribbon is, of course, a ribbon. So mine is gray, and we'll also need a sewing thread and a sewing needle in a matching color, or you can also go contrasting if you like to add more decoration. And very useful things, in fact very crucial, are pins or dressmaker pins or pins, head pins like this, as we will be pinning down the ribbon before we attach it with a thread. And you should find a surface that's very flat and you have enough room to make sure that the cardigan lies as flat as possible. It's not going to be super flat here where we had these non-stranded sections, and that's okay, don't worry about it. We have to kind of live with it. It will dissipate and disappear, but don't worry if you can't get it fully flat there. What I mean flat is the main fabric of the cardigan should be as flat as possible. Maybe it would, if you know that your yarn will grow and stretch with blocking, perhaps it's even a good idea to block your cardigan before you attach the ribbon, because imagine that if we attach this now, this really inelastic thing, to something that will grow, then it's very likely that the ribbon will be pulling your button band, be shorter than the rest of the cardigan. It might not be a good look. But I trust that mine will hold somewhat. It will grow a little bit, and I will just give it a little bit of slack to cater for that. But yes, if you are worried and if you're a perfectionist, you could block your cardigan before doing this. Here's how it goes. We need to fold a little bit of the ribbon at the like that to avoid having this edge that keeps unraveling exposed. Oops. I'll just cut it here and do another fold, and that way it will be tucked away and not unravel on us. And we will place it just above the beginning of the cut and pin down with one of those dressmaker or head pins, whatever you have. And then we'll carry on laying it as flat as possible. Again, most important, we don't need to cover necessarily this side. We need to cover the side that we cut. So perhaps I should even move it one stitch forward to make sure that it is covering the cut side. Oh, and it's also a good idea to seam this if you have a double neckband, to seam this shut before you attach the ribbon. Otherwise, it will look a bit funny. If you try and seam it afterwards, it might be tricky to do it neatly. There we go. Where is the tip not coming out? There we go. Right, so that's my first pin. We'll add the next pin about 1 inch away. I mean, it depends on how many pins you have. We'll go that way this time. I'm trying to sort of stick to seeing the same stitch column, but we'll see how that goes so that it appears straight. And the reason why we're pinning it down first, because we want to get it perfect before we attach it permanently. And I will move this a bit more again because I think I didn't get it completely straight. Trying to get this line to run with, let's say, that stitch column. All right, this will take a little time. This will, depending on how much of a perfectionist you are. In the interest of time, I'm just gonna leave it there. Obviously do it the whole way through before you start attaching it, and only cut it at the end when you know how long you need it. And also remember to cut a little bit more because you want to tuck in that other end as well. And once you've done that, you'll take a sewing thread and needle, make a little knot there, and we'll start attaching it with a very simple stitch. Where did it go? Okay, so there we go. I'll start from the bottom of the ribbon here and tuck that little knot away from sight, and voila. We grab a little bit of the knit fabric and we come back out the ribbon just a little further away from where we entered before, and we grab a little bit of knit fabric and come out a bit further again, so you can see that these legs are kind of perpendicular. Well, they're supposed to be, but I'm not a machine, so it's not going to be perfect, but I'll attempt for them to be perpendicular. And then when we hit a corner of the ribbon, we'll do one perpendicular. We'll come out the same way where we are. Don't need this pin anymore, it gets in my way. And we do a diagonal, come out in the same spot again, and then perpendicular to the other edge. Now we don't want to pierce, put the needle through the fabric all the way like so. because we don't want these to be visible on the front. So we just catch just a little bit of the knit fabric by a float or half a stitch. It's okay to split yarn here because we really don't want any of this to be coming through here at the front of the fabric, at the public side. And we just go all the way around, all the way down, do another corner and come back up here. We'll finish there. So it's going to take a little while and patience, but it's going to be very worth it, and you won't have to worry about your steek unraveling or anything like that. And that's it. That's the steeking part done. If this was your first time steeking, I hope you enjoyed it, and even if this wasn't your first time steeking, I hope you enjoyed the project as much as I have, and thank you so much for making it with me.